अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय। अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय.
Jai Baba, everyone. Welcome. And Naosherwan? Yes, please come forward. So Naosherwan, we're happy to have you back in Myrtle Beach.
Thank you very much.
Both of you
And
here.
happy to have him back at the Circle Center.
And back at the Circle Center. So you probably all know who Naosherwan is. He's been the publisher of the Glow magazine. Now this is the 57th year, is that right, Naosherwan? And he met Meher Baba as a very young child, just probably a baby, up in Dehradun back in the early 1950s. And today he's going to speak about the book From Boyhood to Godhood.
If you have a copy, then you should.
Yeah,
Yes, we have copies.
they have copies, good. I'm going to ask some questions, and just to get the conversation going. Later we can have some questions and answers from the audience. And we're also broadcasting this on Zoom. Here's a copy of the book, which came out, I think, last year. Is that right, Naosherwan?
In 21,
1921.
the first edition,
And now you're on to the third edition. Is that
and the
right?
third edition. This
Yeah.
is the third edition.
Wonderful. So, Naosherwan, I'll start by asking you, what first inspired you to do this, and how many years did it take you to get all the research done and to write the book?
Jai Meher Baba. At the outset, I would like to thank Angela and Farishta for inviting me, and Dennis, and thank you for being the moderator, and a thank you to my Meher Baba family here in Myrtle Beach. Thank you to all of you. The genesis of this book, Boyhood to Godhood, had its seed way back in 1969 when Baba dropped his physical form. Soon after Baba dropped his physical form, I was able to rush over to Mehrabad and be in Baba's tomb when his body lay in the tomb. And when I arrived, Erich was the only one sitting there, and he ushered me quickly in. I closed the doors, I sat down, and I had an interesting experience in the tomb. Since we have a paucity of time, I won't go into all the details and all the stories, but the only thing I'd like to mention is that when I was seated at the top of the steps of the tomb and holding on to Baba's feet, I said to myself that beloved Baba has been so kind and loving and giving to me for all these years. Now that he's dropped his physical form, I would like to do something in return. Something that I would have the capacity to do myself. And since I was a journalist and a writer and an author and so forth, I had seen several of Meher Baba's biographies that were not complete. The God Man was not complete, even in The Perfect Master, of course, was earlier than that. And the Avatar was incomplete. So none of Baba's biographies were complete. So I told Baba in the tomb that I would write a complete biography of Meher Baba. And I took a promise that I would do that. And then, of course, the crowd started coming and I stepped out. But when all this had subsided, the crowds were gone, and the Mandli was back, I spoke to Erich and Mani, and I told them that I had committed to writing a biography of Meher Baba. And they invited me to stay at Meherazad, and I stayed at Meherazad, and literally Erich, Adi and Mani opened up their coffers for me to collect material. What I would do is, in those days there was no electricity in Meherazad. So I would sit till 12:30, 1 o'clock under a hurricane lamp, transcribing Chanji's diaries, Ramju's diaries, and things like that. Letters that were exchanged for Baba and Erich, and so he opened up all his files and folders. Then during the day, Adi had given me a scooter to go to his office, and then because there was electricity there, I would take down material from the original, like original letters from Gandhi and so forth. So I would copy them all out. And then Adi agreed to give me his diaries for a 3-year period. He had written diaries from 1922 to 1970, to 1969. So I collected all those diaries with a suitcase full of Adi's diaries, Chanji's diaries, and every single photograph that I could lay my hands on, because Adi had opened up his cupboards and said, just take all the photographs that you want. So I took Gulmai's collection and Chanji's collection and Adi's collection, and everybody's collection are at Beloved Archives. So we had this collection of photographs. So when I went back, I decided that I would start writing what would be known as The Beloved. So it took me quite some time to write The Beloved. Meanwhile, Mani had sent me diaries, so I had her diaries as well. But her diaries were zeroed in on the early years, about her father, about her mother, about her grandmother, about her uncles and aunts. All those stories from her diaries are in this book, Meher Baba From Boyhood to Godhood. But when I did the book, these diaries hadn't come to me. They were sent to me because they were first given to Francis Brabazon. And as it turned out, Francis Brabazon did not include them in any of the material in his first volume. So she sent me a set as well. So I completed The Beloved, and then I tried to find a printer who I could give the book for publishing at a reasonable cost. And we didn't have any money at that time. In fact, Adi Irani was willing to give me all the negatives, and I said, Adi Kaka, I can't take these negatives. I have no money to make positives of them. So I had just started my job with the Times of India, and so there wasn't any money. So then The Beloved, of course, was complete, and I had the manuscript, I had all the photographs. I spent some time with Mani and with Rano and with the Women Mandli, taking down captions to all the photographs from the book, for the book. A lot of them they didn't know, and the captions because of the different years and so forth. In any case, 1972, I came to the United States on my first visit to the US. And my job was to, they had, several centers had invited me to give talks at various different college campuses, at colleges. So they would take me in a car from one college campus to another college campus, and I would just keep on giving talks. And I had so many experiences of people criticizing me. Somebody wanted to. One day I was at the Los Angeles Center, and as I walked out, there was a group of Jesus freaks who called me Meher Baba is the devil, and as I walked out, and so there was a lot of experiences that I had, even in the University of California. There was a lot of people who criticized me for doing propaganda for Meher Baba and so forth. However, when I came to Myrtle Beach, Elizabeth Patterson had also invited me, and I was the only one on the center, and she would come and pick me up for lunch and dinner and breakfast, and I would come and I would lose my way, and she would come and pick me up. So it was quite a adventure. Even now, I keep losing my way on the center. So then so one day Elizabeth said, so I told her, Elizabeth, I showed her the manuscript, and I said, here's the manuscript of Baba's biography that I've written. So she says, can you leave it with me for overnight, and also the photographs? And I said, here it is. She read the manuscript overnight. She saw the photographs, and she told me, can you come tomorrow for tea? And of course I was going to come, and I'm going to introduce you to a couple of people. So I go into her living room, and of course I used to have my lunch and dinner with Kitty, and I think they had a cook whose name was Bessie. So we used to all have dinner together and lunch together. So when I walked in, I saw two people sitting on the sofa, and Elizabeth introduced me. This is Andy and Sheila. So it was Andy Lesnick and Sheila Krinsky. They will publish your book. No questions asked. So I handed over my manuscript to them, and the book. It took some time for the book to be published. It took 2 years. It came out in 1974. And I think now it's gone into 8 printings. And it's, I think, second to God Speaks in terms of sales. So the Beloved has been an introductory book for a lot of people who came to Meher Baba, and that was Baba's grace. Should I continue, or you want to?
Well, just a question that popped into my mind is, when Adi gave you his diaries, did he have copies of them, or did he give you the originals?
He gave me the originals. I transcribed them for 3 years. It took a hell of a long time. You know, Adi was a very interesting diarist. I'm extremely fond of diaries. Extremely fond of diaries and memoirs. I had once launched a magazine called Great Letters and Diaries. I was so fond of diaries, and publishers used to send me diaries, and I would review them in that magazine. It ran for a short period because, again, lack of funds, but I was always very fond of diaries. But Adi was an unusual diarist. If he had curry and rice in the morning, that's what he would write down. He would write down, if he had toast in the morning, he would write down he had toast with eggs. So every minute detail was in the diaries.
Wow.
So when I had the diaries transcribed, I didn't do it myself because it was a lot. Only 1933 was missing. He lost it while traveling with Baba on the boat. So that was the only year that was missing. Otherwise, from 1932 to 1969, I had the entire collection of diaries. So what I did was I marked out the areas that were pertaining to Baba. And those have been transcribed, and then after 3 years, I returned it to Adi Rani. But he also gave me some original Chanji's diaries, original, and I still have them. Some of them that were with transcriptions from Norina and from when she was the interpreter, and then Chanji was the interpreter. And some of it you'll see, I've used some of it. I've of course published a book called The Answer, conversation with Meher Baba, which was based on Chanji's diaries. And that has been incorporated now in a book called The Silent Word. So that was the story of Adi's diaries. There is a lot of material. Adi did not, for example, it would say Baba in Mirazad, Baba in Mirazad, Baba in Mehrabad. Baba, and if he was not accompanying Baba, it only said Baba in Delhi or Baba in Nasik or Baba in Bombay. But if he was with Baba, then there'll be details of conversations. For example, now, when Murshid Yus passed away, there was no time for me to write a kind of a bit about her. And Adi was the interpreter of Baba's interpreter when she was there in 1948. So his diary contained all the details. So I was able to then reconstruct and put the things in. Then one of the most invaluable advantages of Adi's diary was that in the last days when Meher Baba was suffering a great deal physically, Erich would send a letter to Adi, which he would write at 1 and 2 at night, and send it with the person going in the morning to be delivered to Adi to keep him ready just in case Dr. Ginde called him about Baba's health.
Wow.
And those were attached to the diaries. So what I did was that when I was doing the ancient one, which was with Erich, I put together, so in the ancient one is the only authentic account of Meher Baba's last days. Because they were based on handwritten notes from Erich to Adi.
Wow. I never knew that.
Yes. That book is now out of print, and I hope to incorporate that in another book on Erich that I have in mind.
So Naosherwan, Boyhood to Godhood really is a unique book because it focuses on that period of Baba's life that not many, in the other biographies, like Lord Mayhew, there's some information, but not nearly the type of depth that you have in Boyhood to Godhood.
Right.
Was that one of the motivating factors for you in creating this book?
Well, one of the lacuna that I felt was that the beloved never really covered Baba's boyhood. And that was lacking. So, there were 3 Baba lovers from Gujarat who, from Navsari essentially, who mentioned to me that they had been able to obtain, Dr. Barucha obtained the diaries of Beli Irani, who was Baba's boyhood friend. He was like, absolute, intimate, close friend of Merwan. His diaries were in 6 volumes. And these 3 people, then Dr. Barucha passed away, and the other 3 people translated the diary. Then another person from the 3 passed away, and they were left with 2. So they completed the translation of the diaries.
Originally Gujarati?
They were originally in Gujarati, and Beli, I've written about what happened to Beli. He drifted away for a period of time because he was a very hot-headed man. He had a very hard life and uncontrollable, and all his life was in the book. He was sent to prison and so forth and things like that. And then he was in a nursing home in Secunderabad in central India. So the 6 volumes were available to me, except volume 2, which was lost. So many years later, in 2017, we found volume 2 with one of the one of the two who were left behind, they said that we were going through all these papers that had been left behind, and I found this volume 2 untranslated in very old Gujarati. Glass of water, please. Thanks. So what happened was, this was a very interesting little incident, that Maruk and I were at the retreat, and we were hoping that we had this manuscript with us, that we would bump into somebody who knew Gujarati and could translate the work. And we couldn't find anybody, so we were sitting there. Firstly, thank you so much. So while we were seated having our meal, we saw two ladies walk into the dining room, and they looked like Gujarati ladies. One was older, one was younger. So I told Maruk, I said, let me check with them if they know old Gujarati, and they might help us to translate. So I go up to them and I tell them this, that we found this diary, and it's Baba's early years, and would you consider translating it? Because I don't know old Gujarati. I know what you translate, I can put it in English.
So is there a difference between old Gujarati and like
Yes.
everyday Gujarati?
Yes, yes. The old Gujarati is Latinish. Yeah, kind of old Gujarati. Most Parsis and Zoroastrians cannot read and understand old Gujarati.
Interesting. But that's what Bailey decided to write his
But
diary.
Bailey, in those early years, they wrote in old Gujarati. Yeah, yeah. So that's what happened. Although Baba spoke in a colloquial language called Dari. Yeah. And that was he of course knew Persian as well, but when the mother and son, or the father and, when they didn't want money to understand something, they spoke in Dari. So I go up to them and they said, can you show us the manuscript? And I had the manuscript, and I gave them the little book. And they said, oh sure, we can do it. But our English is not very good. I said, not to worry, I'll do the English translation, and and I know Gujarati, so you can speak to me in Gujarati and I'll simultaneously translate. It wasn't the easiest way to do it. So, but there's a problem, the lady tells me. So our driver is waiting outside to take us back to Bombay. So, I'm sorry, I don't think we can do it. I said, oh, very well. So I went back to where we were having our meal, and a few minutes later, after the mother and daughter were talking with each other, the young lady comes and tells me, he says, look, this seems as if it's a God-given, Baba-given opportunity for us to do this Baba work. We will undertake to do it. So we are arranging for the driver to stay at the guest house, and we will extend our stay for the day today, and we'll work with you. This was in the afternoon, so immediately we went into another room and I sat and we translated till 11 o'clock, till the caretakers told us to go to our rooms. The work was still not finished. So she says, you know what, I won't go back to Bombay tomorrow also. So the next day we worked all day long and we completed the translation of the book. But that was a key missing volume of the 6 volumes. So,
A lot of good information in it.
a lot of good information.
Did you then, with that material, then you translated from Gujarati to English, so then you had to do a fair amount of editorial work, I would assume.
Oh yes. Yes.
Because when you read it in the book, it sounds very much like someone has written a story. It's like reading somebody's story. I don't know, was it like that in
Yes.
the diary, or did you have to make it more seamless like that?
I had 5 editors on this book.
Wow.
One of the editors was Zoe Newell, who passed away.
Mhm. Very good editor.
And beg your pardon?
A very good editor.
Yes, a very good editor. And then we had David Fenster only looked at the factual part of the book. He was not the editor, but just the factual to check whether the facts.
Mhm.
And then we had 2 editors from California. One's name was Scott, the other was Duncan Knowles.
Hmm.
Duncan Knowles and Scott. So we were there, and then there was another one. She had worked for Beloved Archives for 2 years, and she was later on the editor of a medical journal in New York. So she also undertook to do the editing. So we had it extensive, and I did several edits of it, and so very carefully we did the edits.
It reads really well. It's really interesting. And it's particularly interesting because it covers a period of life that really there's no other way of learning about that period of Baba's life other than through the book.
And we took a lot of sources also, and you'll notice that every chapter or every few pages we've put the source so that people can go to the source and read the source. At the same time, we didn't want anyone to contest the contents of the book. That's why I've put the source at every stage, although it kind of interferes in the flow, but I decided I would keep the source so that people know where we've taken the details from.
Yeah.
So then where was I?
Well, let's say, so you were telling us the different books you had written based upon Audie's diaries and other diaries, I guess. And then
No. On Adi's diaries, I'd never written any books.
Oh,
It was mainly this. I had taken material from Adi's diaries for The Beloved.
The Beloved, yes.
Yeah. But for Boyhood to Godhood, we relied very heavily on these translations: Mani's diaries, Gulmai's diaries, Mera's narration, and a lot of interviews with Rich and the other Mandli. Bendu, for example, was very, very important contact for us. And Aloba.
And Pendu lived next door to Baba during those years.
Yes.
And was his cousin, so
Yes.
he knew Baba very well during that period of time.
So then, when I was there in '69 and I was living with the Mandli for a period of time, I had mentioned it to Mani and Aloba at that time that I'd like to write something about Shiryar's early years and Merwan and so forth. But that didn't go very far because I had focused my entire attention on The Beloved, on working on The Beloved. But both Mani and Aloba had mentioned to me that if you want to do anything with Shiryar and the family of Merwan Shiryar Irani and Shiryar and Shireen and Gulandun and all the Mir Baba's family, Merwan's family, you have to go to Iran. Otherwise you can't.
And why was that?
You'll have to go to the source. So you'll have to travel to Iran and follow in the footsteps of Shiryar.
Right. And you did do that.
So in 1976, my mother and I, we went to Iran. We first went to Karachi, and from Karachi, because my mother's family was from Karachi, and we were kind of, I was invited by Minu Kharas to give a talk there. So I went to Karachi, and then my mother and I, it's a short distance to Tehran by air, so we went to Tehran. And we landed at Mehrabad International Airport. Of course, the Mehrabad is M-E-H-R-A-B-A-D, it is theater. But now it's not Mehrabad International Airport, they've moved the airport somewhere else. So another, so that's just one of the transit points. So we landed at Mehrabad International Airport, and our first introduction was to a bit of orthodoxy, mullahs and Muslims walking around, telling beads, women in burqas. My mother was not wearing one, and we had come, and Farhad Shafa, who was our contact in Tehran, came to receive us. So there's one person here who was there when I was there, and that's Mernoush. And she was the little girl at that time. So I don't know whether you remember my visit there, Mernoush. But she, her sister, and her mother used to live in a small house in a village called Kashanak, where Asfandyar Vesali used to live. And this Kashanak bordered the ramparts of the presidential palace, Naosherwan Palace. Did you want to show, Angela, did you want to show pictures?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we can go to the picture of the palace. That's the first Naosherwan Palace. The third picture on the left. Okay. So this is a picture of the palace. It was called the Naosherwan Imperial Palace. And now I'd like to give a little bit of background to what happened as a result of the small group of Babur lovers who lived next to the palace, headed by Asfandyar Vesali. So when the mullahs, who were devout Muslims, learned that there was a small group of people who followed a spiritual master who claimed himself to be the same as Muhammad, they sought to destroy them. And the one who faced the brunt of this was Asfandyar Vesali. So Asfandyar did not speak English at that time. I don't know whether I don't think in the later years he spoke English. But he narrated to me in detail all that he and his family had to go through. And he would walk me through his little orchard and through his gardens, and he organized a couple of, we were staying with him, my mother and I were staying with him, and his wife Shireen. And he had three sons, Iraj, Faridun, and Parviz. So what happened was that apparently a twin that Shireen had died from arsenic poisoning. And one of the sons, Parviz, suffered severe brain injury. Now I had met them as well, and you could see that he was not all there. And in the later years, I learned that one Zoroastrian, at least, one Baba lover was executed because they found a copy in Persian of God Speaks. They had asked him to recant, but he did not, and he was executed. But this treatment of the Zoroastrians was not new. For hundreds of years they were being persecuted. Like the Baha'is were persecuted. And even today they are persecuted in Iran. And the Zoroastrians are not persecuted to that extent because Reza Shah Pahlavi had given them a kind of a freedom to follow their own religion as long as it did not interfere with the Muslim laws of the time, Islamic laws of the time. So I took that opportunity of meeting several Prem Ashram boys who were now working as farmers and had little pieces of plots of land and so forth. So the worst, while we all know of the suffering of the Jews in the Holocaust, and we also know about the Spanish Inquisition and Chinese and the Holocaust and so forth, the Zoroastrians suffered tremendously during the Qajar dynasty. And so how do we go further, Angela?
Oh, yes.
Is there a way of my doing
I don't have a remote on this.
it? Okay. So just a few, if you like, I can just go on, keep speaking. So this is Asfandyar, his wife, and a neighbor of theirs. It's an early photograph of Asfandyar.
Wow.
You can go to the next one. This is a picture of a typical Zoroastrian family at that time during the Qajar period, Qajar dynasty. And you'll see that they have a very strong resemblance to Muslims in their clothing and their demeanor, because a very large number of Zoroastrians lived very much like the Muslims in order to safeguard their lives. And from externally, they looked like Muslims, but they were essentially Zoroastrians. You can go to the next one. Okay, just hold it here. Okay. So during the or maybe you can go a little further. We'll have to come back to this, Angela. One more. Oh. Yeah, another. Yes. No, another one. Another one. Another one. Okay. So the first. So we stayed at Asfandyar's, and then our next move was to go to Yazd. So we first went to Shiraz along with Farhad Shafa, who was our guide, and we went to the tomb of Hafiz and Sheikh Saadi, and from there we went to Khurramshah. Now Khurramshah in Yazd was the home of Shehryar Mundegar Irani, Meher Baba's, Meherwan's father. And this picture that you see is Shehryar's house in Khurramshah that still stands there. You can go to the next one. So when we went there, okay, so you can leave it at that. So this is my mother on the extreme right, and that's me in the middle. And the lady on the left is the wife of Shapur Merdadi, one of Mir Baba's cousins, and that's his wife, Pariduk Rodi. So she was living in the house at that time, the cousin was not there. So while I walked around the house, and it was lovely, she was a lovely, hospitable lady, I was very anxious to see if there were any places that had not been. She told us that the house had been completely renovated in 1936. So I asked her are there any areas in the house that are untouched and have not been renovated? And she took us to the cellar. And in the cellar, where there were large jars with filled with flour and so forth, that was untouched, and that was a cellar that was used by Sheriar's family. So we can go to the next slide. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Do you want me to sit there?
This is the cellar that I was talking to you about, which was untouched. It was there since the time of Sheriar. Okay. Okay, you can leave it at that just now. Yeah, we'll then go back. So, now a little bit about Khurram Shah. All of Mir Baba's relatives, including Shireen's mother, Bulandoon, everybody lived in Khurram Shah. Now, Mirvan Sheriar Irani, which is Mir Baba's name, was not his original name, in the sense that that was not the family name. The family name was Khurram Shahi. So most Zoroastrian Iranis had their family name as their last name. So if they came from Khurram Shah, they were known as Khurram Shahi. If they came from Yazd, they were known as Yazdani, and so on and so forth. But when they came to India, when they migrated to India, they changed the name to Irani. Because what happened was that the local populace recognized them as those having come from Iran. Like take my family name, it's Nalawala. Now when my ancestors migrated, we were living in Gujarat near a Nala. Nala means a stream. So the people of the area who had come earlier, they would say, oh, they are Nalawalas. So that's how the origin of these names happened. So there was always this the Holocaust or the attacks on the Zoroastrians was so vicious in those early days of the Qajar dynasty that many of them planned to leave the country surreptitiously, either by boat or by land.
Naosherwan, what dates were those?
Oh, offhand, I won't be able to tell you, but
Late 1800s?
yes. So it was only when the Reza Shah Pahlavi, that means the last Shah's father, came to the throne, did he relent, and the Zoroastrian heads, the Zoroastrian heads of the Parsis in India came to Iran asking that things get a little better for them. But that was in the later years.
Interesting.
So I would say the 20s. Let me put it that way. It was before Baba went to Iran in 1929. It was before that. So the Mani's diary says, my father would relate about his Irani friend who one day reached the end of his limit of restraint with dramatic results. It was a custom laid down by Muslims that when an Irani, by that I mean a Zoroastrian, I'm reading from Mani's diary, accosted a Muslim no matter his age, he should salute and bow down to him. And if the Irani were riding a horse or a donkey, he had to dismount to offer obeisance. One day, this man that my father knew was out on his little horse, where on the way he met a Muslim boy. The boy stood in the path, gripping the horse's bridle. He commanded the Irani man to dismount and salute him. This was the last straw, and as the man dismounted, he looked around and saw the place was quite deserted. He also knew that there was a well close by. His control completely snapped. He put a hand over the boy's mouth, picked him up bodily, carried him to the well, and threw him in. Then he quickly mounted his animal, and it seems he took the next ship, which was sailing that afternoon to Bombay with the help of fellow Iranians. Now the genocide against the Zoroastrians is extremely well documented by several English travelers who traveled to Iran at that time. So I consulted, one was particularly Brown, who had a lot of details. So let's go back, Angela, to that same one that we missed out, back. No, before this. It's the Tower of Silence, before the Tower of Silence. Before this.
Sorry, give me a sec.
I think it's before this. Yes, before this. One more before. So this is a picture of the Tower of Silence, where the Zoroastrians dispose of their dead. Mirwan's father and grandfather, Shehryar, and his father were keepers of the Tower of Silence. So when we went there, this Tower of Silence had been abandoned. So I was able to photograph the entrance to the Tower of Silence. No Zoroastrian is allowed to go inside the Tower of Silence. But because it was an abandoned Tower of Silence, I was able to photograph this. And then the next picture you will see the other, sorry about that.
No, just stay there.
That's in
Stay
Kasimabad.
there.
Huh?
Kasimabad.
That's in Kasimabad. So that is the actual Tower of Silence. Yeah. Okay. So let's leave it at that, and then we'll go to the next one. So they were known as Nase Salar. Okay. So we've talked about that. Let me go. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Yeah. We'll leave it at that. So what happened was that after we saw Kasimabad, they our plan was to go to the house of Aga Baidul. And Aloba had told me that when you go to Aga Baidul's house in Jafarabad, you'll see all Baba's photographs, framed pictures all around there. So I was extremely excited to go to Jafarabad. But nobody seemed to know where Jafarabad was. Nobody knew. So somebody then, after asking a number of people, they told us to go to a village called Majumard. I mean, we are literally talking about following into people's footsteps. So we go to this village of Majumard, and we took a taxi, and the taxi got stuck in the sand, and we walked the distance. So we go to this village of Majumard, and we are asked to get in touch with a man called Hassan Mirabi. Can you imagine coming to Myrtle Beach and saying, can you tell me where Hassan Mirabi lives? So here is this busy village, and we are looking for Hassan Mirabi. Nobody seems to know who he is. Then there was a group of men standing there. So we said, do you know Hassan Mirabi? He says, no, but we know Hassan Rafi. Perhaps that's the man you're looking for. Who do we see coming down the road? Hassan Mirabi. So then he comes, and you know those magic words, Jai Baba. And he says, Jai Baba. And we knew that we had met our man. And then he talks in English. And we said, oh, you speak English? He said, yes, I learned that in Hazrat Babajan school. He was one of the students of Hazrat Babajan school. So the man on the extreme left in this picture, the one in the light blue shirt, is Hassan Mirabi. So we asked him to get into the taxi with us, and he said, I'll take you to Jafarabad and to Baidul's house. Now we step into Jafarabad, so the taxi stopped, and we get into Jafarabad, and there's no one there. Completely abandoned village. Not a soul in the whole village. And again we said, Jai Baba, Jai Baba, Jai Baba. And these two people came out. They were the only two residents of Jafarabad. They come out and they identify themselves as Ardeshar Yazdani. You know, I was telling you earlier that if you come from Yazd, you're known as Yazdani. That man over there holding Baba's calendar is Yazdani. That was a Persian calendar that they had published and distributed it at that time, many years later. And the woman is Wahibid Shirmardi, his wife. So the only thing, they used to get water every 2 weeks. A tanker used to come and give them water. So then we all walked up to Aga Baidul's house. And we stood in front of the door, the frame, and it was barred with a broken kind of a post. So I pushed the post, and I walk in to completely broken down house in complete shambles. Rubble everywhere, the roof caved in, completely broken into shambles, and not a trace of Baba's picture anywhere. Nothing at all. We only found slates lying around. And the reason there were slates there, because Baba many years back had financed a school for Persian children there. And Aga Baidul was the teacher. The only thing we found was Hazrat Meher Babar scribbled in chalk on the wall, and we knew that, well, this was a place related to Meher Baba. And then I looked around and I found a broken, empty oil bottle, and I always collected things associated with Baba, and I said, let me just keep this at least. I can't see a thing here, right? I called out to Baba to give me some indication that he was here, some indication. Couldn't find anything. Can we move further?
Yeah.
Yeah, leave it at that. So then what happened was that we were about to give up and walk away when I see a trapdoor completely submerged in sand. And I tug at this, and start tugging at the trapdoor. This was my only hope of seeing whether there was something in the trapdoor, in the little opening. And my mother kept saying, be careful of scorpions. So I tugged and I tugged and I tugged. I gingerly put my hand inside the little opening. What I found was sand. So I moved the sand, I kept on moving it. And oh, that's my 5 o'clock alarm.
Deva.
Thank you. Jai Baba. So, as I'm moving the sand, my hand starts touching paper. I get more and more excited. At that time, Farhad Shafar took that picture of me.
That's you.
And I find letters, photographs, Baba's printed ghazals, all in a stack in that. I pulled them all out, and there was one letter which I've reproduced in the book. That was a letter written by, it was written to, what was the name of the headmaster of the Hazrat Babajan school?
Afsari.
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 Afsari. Rao Sahib Afsari. He had written a letter to Aga Baidul to tell the people of Iran that His Holiness Meher Baba would be there in Iran on Navroz Day, the first day of Navroz. So that letter was a very precious letter that we've reproduced in the book. And there were photographs of the children of Hazrat Babajan school and so forth. And then there were other sheets of paper, and Farhad said that since you found all this material in Iran, you can copy everything you want, you can photograph them and things. I took the photographs, I took some of them, but please leave them here in Iran for the people of Iran. Eventually, of course, Farhad Shafar migrated to California, became a Sufi, and now all that material is in Sufism reoriented. So we found all this material. So how are we doing time-wise?
Guess we have another half hour.
Okay, go ahead. Do you have any questions?
So the material that you gathered, Mani had said go to Iran if you want to learn about.
Mani and Aroba all very persistently.
Mm-hmm. And then, now that was in 76, was that right?
That was in 69.
69.
I only got an opportunity of going there in 76
76 to Iran.
to Iran.
So then it was many years later than they
Many years
used,
later.
used it in the book.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's some other interesting things about the book. In it, I believe there's a whole section where you talk about Pune, what I remember.
Yes, yes.
Which I found fascinating.
Yes, yes. So before I turn over the chapter of Iran, if you can just move to one more slide. I wanted to give them a flavor of the, yeah, this one, yeah. So, as I was telling you earlier about the genocide against the Zoroastrians, if you went, say for example, if I went looking for the children of children who were at Hazrat Babajan school, I met several of them and I photographed them. I've published them in the Glow at various different articles written by Farhad and so forth. You'd see them as ordinary Iranians, They were working as farmers, and most of them were working as farmers, even the children who had gone to Iran in the later years. But in order to escape from a very, very strict Islamic rule and from getting converted to Islam and letting go of their ancient religion and their ancient scriptures and books, the Iranis the Zoroastrians started taking shelter in caves. And there are several, I did some extensive research on this subject. They came to be known as Gufe Nashin. Gufe meaning cave, Nashin meaning inhabitants. So even today, people find skeletons of those who died in these cave areas and they were buried there. They can find their catacombs and so forth of them. So every year, in order to celebrate to think about these Zoroastrians who sacrificed their lives, Zoroastrians gather. These are two Zoroastrian priests, and at the back there are Zoroastrians. There's a festival. Every year there's a festival, and this is a picture of that festival. So, in relation to this, I'd like to tell you a story that has never appeared in print before, ever. It's in this book, and it was a story that Mani had never heard of, or anybody had ever heard of. But the reason that I featured it in the book was because I met a man when I was doing research. His name was Shams, and he narrated this story to me, which took my breath away. And I'll narrate that story to you. So when Baba came in 1929, he was traveling from Karamshah to Jafrabad to visit the home of Baidul and his wife. They were still living there. Baba had sent them ahead of time. So while the car was being driven, it suddenly stopped midway. For no apparent reason. They couldn't figure out what went wrong. So while they were tinkering with the car, Baba was pacing up and down, as if he was waiting for somebody. Suddenly they see a man on horseback come and stand a distance away from Baba. And Baba looks at him, stares at him, he stares at Baba for quite some time. Baba says, "My work is done." Gets into the car starts, and they proceed to. And then Baba just tells them that this was a Gufe Nashin. They have different names. One is called Sahib-e-Dalan, is another name that you'll find in history books. And Gufe Nashin is another one. So, my interpretation of this is, and this is not in history books or anything, my interpretation is that from this point onwards, from 1929 onwards, the Zoroastrians were given a new lease of life. People from Iran, senior Zoroastrians from Iran started coming to the court of Reza Shah Pahlavi trying to make a deal of letting the Zoroastrians follow their religion and not get converted, and so on and so forth. And it became, the life of the Zoroastrians became a lot easier in Iran. So this was a story that I wanted to share with you.
So, you said, what was the name of this band that Baba interacted with?
Nobody knows the
No,
name of the
maybe-
man. He was just,
Not the name, but the title or that you gave it.
they were known as Gufe Nashin.
And what is that?
Gufe means cave, and Nashin means inhabitants.
Oh, so he was a Zoroastrian.
Zoroastrian, inhabitants of a cave. And they had, they would, if you saw them, you would think he's a farmer tilling the soil. But they actually were preserving the ancient books of the Zoroastrians, keeping the flame alive.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm going to narrate one last story and then open it up for questions if there are any. So very often I'm asked this question. We understand that Zoroastrians faced genocide and that they left the country. That was not the reason for Shahryar to leave Iran. He left because he was a mystic, he was a dervish. He was looking out and he was in search of God. So he left. In fact, when we were on top, when we came down from this Tower of Silence, we met a government guide. So he tells me, so when we went up the Tower of Silence, it was a vast tract of land. I photographed that vast tract of land. And this man tells me, he says, you know, you went up the Tower of Silence, but let me tell you something about this place. This place was looked after by a man called Shahryar. So I said, tell me more. So he said, well, you know, Shahryar was a man of God and he went in search of God. So one day he just got up and walked away into this wilderness and we never heard of him. However, his sister Piroja lived here in this village. And then she also migrated to India. And we never heard of this family again. So that was a testimony of somebody telling me about Shahryar having left Iran. So that was his reason for leaving Iran. But Meherwan's grandmother, that is Shireen's mother, Gulandun, her family also left Iran for Pune. Why did they leave? So the story goes, according to Mani's diary, is that Gulandun's family was a very poor family. Dorabji and Gulandun. The family was a very poor family. And to supplement the income, Gulandun would go from different Zoroastrian families on the other side of town to ask them if there was any work she could do in terms of making little socks for children, scarves, and things like that. And she used to supplement her income that way. So she would go in the morning, get the orders, and then come back and make these things and then go and deliver them and collect the money. One day, she went on such a mission on the other side of the town. And while she was returning, it got a little late. And as she was crossing a section of the village, there was a house with some ruffians sitting on the veranda. And water had been sprinkled in front of this house. So these ruffians told her that You cannot cross this path till all the water gets dried up by the sun. And she looked at the sun, she looked at the water, and she figured that this would take a long time to dry up. So she fervently prayed to God for help. She sat there at the edge of the road while these boys guffawed, passed vulgar remarks, and made fun of her. As she was fervently praying, suddenly out of nowhere, a bearded man, old man turns up. He takes in the whole situation at a glance. The boys here, the lady sitting there. He goes to the boys and he upbraids them for their behavior. And obviously they respected him, so they backed off. And he goes to Gulandur and says, "Daughter, I know what you've gone through. Let me escort you home." And he escorts her home. And as she turns to thank him, he was not there. He was gone. But this was an indication. The family took this as an indication from God that they had to leave the country, and a few days later, a week later or so, they packed up the bags, took a boat, and went to live in Pune. At that time, she was pregnant with Shireen. And then Shireen was delivered.
Khurramshahr is a city by the sea.
Beg your pardon?
Khurramshahr is a city by the sea.
Khurramshahr, it's in Tehran. But it's a hilly area, mountainous area. Yeah. Jai Meher Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank you very much.
You want to take some questions now from the floor?
Sure. There are.
So, Alan?
Yes, sir. Alan.
So you go into great detail in the book about Kasbah. Could you tell a tale, including an interaction between Bailey and Merwan at Kasbah?
Well, the question is about Kasbah. The place, Kasbah was the place where Merwan and his early disciples gathered. And it was considered very sacrosanct because the small group of disciples held their spiritual gatherings there, and Baba would talk to them. In fact, it's very interesting that you asked me this, but in Kasbah, one day, and just a little anecdote, these young people who were crowding around Merwan, who adored him, who admired him, but didn't really know who he was. So, I mean, why are we attracted to him? What is it that is in this boy that attracts us so much? And why are we attracted to his words? So one day, Baba was 24 years old. 24. And suddenly there was a discussion among these 3, 4, 5 friends about religion. And Merwan turns to them and says, basically, religion is one. There is only one religion. The source from which this religion has come into being is continuous, despite the lapse of ages. Yet, several branches have come forth from this one religion, such as the Zoroastrian, Hindu, and Mohammedan religions. There have been many others. And then Merwan continues. For example, water from the tap fills different pots for different purposes. like washing, cooking, drinking. The source, the tap, is the same. Similarly, the Hindu or Mohammedan religion or the Zoroastrian or Buddhist or Christian religion springs from the same source, which is God. Meherwan, I've written here that Meherwan was 24 years old when he uttered these words. So you see that whenever the opportunity arose at Kaspapet, he would drop these little pearls and make these youngsters who had no clue about God or divinity of any sort, he would give them these little pearls of wisdom to make them aware, essentially to not only make them aware, but to awaken them to their own divinity. And that was Meher Baba's mission throughout his ministry, was to awaken the divinity in each one of us. And the reason that all of you are seated here is because he awakens the divinity within each one of us and makes us aware of his divinity so that we can remember him, love him, serve him, and hold on to his Dhamma. That was his mission.
Beautiful.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a few questions.
You'll have to
but
speak a little loudly.
I have a few questions, but I'll spare you a couple of them. And just one comment you made in 1970.
Do you want to come a little forward?
Sure.
I'm a little hard of hearing.
Yes. I wrote my questions like a good girl. You mentioned you came to Iran in 1976. And that's the year I came to the U.S.
Is that right?
You were going there, I was coming this way. And of course, it was during the Shah, and you mentioned women in burqa and such, but the Shah's father had, either the Shah or his father has actually mandated no hijab for women for a period of time. And of course, the mullahs went crazy and said, what is this? So he loosened it somewhat, and then during that time in 76 when I left Iran, I left a fairly modern Iran, where women had a choice, you know, some wore it, some, and especially in larger cities, it was a very modern Iran. And
very, very modern.
yes.
I
So
saw men in jeans and women extremely manicured and, you know, fashionable.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure people didn't misunderstand that burqa was not always like it is today, sadly. Well, a few questions, but my one question is, did you ever find out why Baidul's house was in such a state of disarray?
No, I didn't find out how that happened, but apparently it was abandoned. The house was abandoned, and we saw that as we were walking past, we saw so many houses that were in shambles, had broken down, there were no roofs. It was essentially an abandoned village, but I hear
Gohar is living there now.
that Gohar, it's redone, and there's somebody living there, and that did Asfandyar pass away over there in that house?
Well, in Jafarabad, yes.
Yes.
And the thing was, I remember when I went back again to Jafarabad. Before that, some youngsters, Persian youngsters, you know, they were in university at that time, and with Farhad Shafa, a group of people, they went back and then they cleaned that up. They removed all those dust. It's actually the desert sand, you know, that over years, you know, accumulated. So they removed everything, and then when my mom and we went there, I remember it was all nice, it was furnished, and they had found some treasures from Baba time. There was a blanket, actually, that Baba put it on himself.
Where did they find this?
That was, I
You missed it,
think, probably after you left. After you left, it came to know that it needed some renovation. You know, in 1976 you left. So there, I was still very young, so I couldn't help out. But the older Baba lovers went there, and then they actually stayed for the weekend and all that, and then they clean it up. And I remember when we women went, you know, my mom and I and my cousins and all that, everything was set, and there were chairs, and I remember I even fall asleep in one of those chairs because we take a bus from Tehran to Yazd at night time, so you couldn't sleep good. So, so they were, I remember the flyers that they have protected and saved. I remember some very small magazines. You know, the book that was written by one of the earlier Persian Mandalis in Farsi, Kashf al-Haqaiq. Yes. Kashf al-Haqaiq copy was there, and then there was this blanket that we were all were after it because we knew that it was on Baba's physical body, and then each one of us were carrying it, and putting it on and all that. So they did clean it up.
Yes, I understand, yes,
yes,
that they've cleaned it up and that there are people living there.
Yes, right now, you know, basically in 1990s, they went back again, 1990s and in 2000. So now is a center. They have 1,000 olive trees, and they do have well, plus they get water from the government, you know, and every 2 weeks for the plants and all that, and basically there is some gatherings, but quiet gatherings, not quite festive, you know, has to be all quiet.
In fact, Mernouche's sisters had once suggested to me that she wanted to film the entire Shehryar and Mirwan, but we never got down to doing it because of the strict regulations of entry.
Gulnaz.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the persecutions of Baha'is continued.
Yes.
I'm so glad to hear that the Zoroastrian were spared.
But in one of the chapters you will find when Baba went there in 1929, a very large number of Baha'is came to see him. And the head of the Baha'is bowed down at Baba's feet.
Interesting. So did any of the Zoroastrians come back to Iran after the Shah kind of loosened the treatment of Zoroastrians in Iran?
No, the migrations had been consistent as such, because there were opportunities available in India, in Bombay, Pune, and in other parts of Gujarat, so they would come and settle down. But there are quite a few Baba lovers who are also Zoroastrians living in Yazd and Kerman and Mashhad, and so a lot of places these Zoroastrians still continue to live, and there's no interference.
Yeah. I know there are some questions from Zoom folks. Angela, you want to take those? Thank you.
Well, there was one main question, really. Someone was asking, did you go out to the Strip? Did you go in 1976 to Iran specifically to write this book, or was it a different?
I went in 1976 to follow in the footsteps of Shehryar Mundigar Irani.
You didn't intend to write a book at the time?
Not on the lines that I've done it now, but that became kind of the basis. My travels to Iran and discovering all this and all the material that I collected, particularly about the genocide against the Zoroastrians. I wanted to give people an idea as to why Merwan's family moved to Iran, because that has not been reflected in any of the other books. It just says that they came, that Shehryar came and he was an ascetic, he was a dervish, and that he came here, but there was a reason that they came.
Came to India.
Came to India. Yes, sir.
Nash, you're interested in diaries. I have an interest myself. I'm always interested in how thinkers organize things and do the creative process. Could you just tell us, and you can use this book as an example or any of your works, how you go from the vast amount of research and material to actually getting through to a completed book. How do you process that information? How do you organize? How do you work?
What I do is, like for example now, I wanted to talk about, this is the new book that I'm working on. And it's called Living the Awakened Life with Meher Baba. Now, it's divided into 4 parts. This is the actual cover of the book. And so the first part is discourses. So this is from 50 years of Glow International. So the first part is discourses. So I've gone through every single issue of the Glow from 1966 till 2016, which is 50 years. And I've selected discourses that have not appeared elsewhere, that were given specially to the Glow, or that Baba gave as asides, or talks that Baba gave from time to time, those that have not appeared at other places. So I've limited the discourses to that part. The second one is meetings. Meetings, people who came to meet Baba, people in different countries, in India, in the United States, in England. What were the details of that meeting, and that kind of thing, which would also include diaries, because these meetings were always mentioned in diaries and how they communicated with Meher Baba. Then I had travels. Again, travels were where Meher Baba traveled to places that are not detailed. Like for example, you may have read extensively about the New Life and the travels that he went through, or the Blue Bus tours, but there was a article that was written exclusively for the Glow by the Women Monthly, by the 4 women who traveled, and that only appears in the Glow. So that's incorporated in this book. And then reflections, and that takes the bulk of the book, because the reflections were by people who met Meher Baba, and what did they think of him, what did they say about him. And in that reflections, it comes with various different people who I interviewed, like Irish Chisawala I interviewed extensively, or there were others who talked about Baba. So the book is divided into those 4 divisions. So the diaries are incorporated in them. But I have to be very careful when I do diaries, is to separate them, the essentials from the non-essentials. Because usually diaries contain a lot of non-essentials. People tend to record everything that they can think of, or what they can feature. So I have to be very discriminating where it comes to diaries.
And mechanically, do you use note cards? Do you use software? Do you dictate? In other words, you're taking notes, you're going through all this. How do you do it? In other
So
words,
then I put it all together, and then I start eliminating all the unnecessary stuff. For example, now, after this book, I plan to do a book on Meher Baba and Gandhi. Now, I have an enormous amount, close to 9,000 pages of material on Gandhi and Baba, and all that material. Now, that's an enormous amount of material, and most of them are diaries. So probably this book will be diaries of various different, what happened on this day, what happened on this day. But only, so when would I use a non-essential? To connect, for connectivity. Yes, ma'am.
Naosherwan, I've read the book online last year. It's very compelling and very entertaining.
Thank
But
you.
I just wondered, especially we read it aloud on a Zoom reading group last year.
the relationship that Baba had with Bailey was so fascinating to me and others, because Bailey never really became a Mandali or a disciple, but he had this unique relationship with Baba, and Baba had a unique relationship with him. And then it seems like he just kind of fades out in the end. But I wondered, vis-a-vis his question about diaries and all that, did Mani, or there's not much in the book about what, say, was Mani or Baba's mother aware of much of what was going on with these friendships?
With their friendship?
Yeah.
Yes,
The
it was,
details of
because
them.
in the book you must have noticed that Shireen did not permit Bailey to come into the house.
Right.
That's why
She
he
didn't
would
like him.
ring the cycle bell early in the morning,
Right.
and Merwan would hear the bell and come down, and they would secretly chat.
Right.
So she did not like any of these friends of Merwan. Shireen did not like any of them.
What Merwan was doing, other than just, that's not shown in the book?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Merwan would keep going to Pasni Maharaj's ashram. That would upset her. He would go to Baba Jan, and that would upset her. Then he would hang around with these friends of his, and they were, in her eyes, they were no good.
Right.
And so she didn't care about them. So that was what was happening in their home. And so she was always very high-strung about that, and that comes through very clearly in the book.
Yes, it does, yeah. Yeah, I just wondered if there was much that Mani had told you about growing up.
No, Mani left her mother very early in life and went to live with Baba. So that was with Baba, but the early years, Mani was not born.
Right.
And
That's right, that's right,
Big
yeah,
difference in age.
that's right. I missed that.
How old was Bailey when he died, or what year?
How old was Bailey when he passed away?
Oh dear. I think he passed away he passed away a few months before Baba dropped his body, I think, or after. I'm absolutely not sure. Just a few months before or after Baba passed away. I think it was before, because he wrote a letter to me. The only letter he ever wrote to me was I think in '69, asking me if I could send him a free copy of The Glow because he couldn't afford it. He was staying in the nursing home. And then I did send him one copy, and then I heard that he had passed away.
There is a question from Elizabeth online. She says, how do you make sure you have the context right, in quotes, if many non-essentials, in quotes, are eliminated? What criteria do you use as the author, editor, to keep those things which establish context, which could affect the meaning of an event or interaction?
My answer to that is that I'm very cognizant of it. I'm very cognizant of that fact, that my attitude is to include everything that would reflect on Meher Baba's majesty. And if it did not do that, then I saw no reason. Or the other criteria would be, how would this help in developing somebody's spiritual growth or the reader's spiritual growth? So that's how I would distinguish between an essential and non-essential.
I.e., what they had for breakfast is not relevant.
Right.
Any other questions?
Thank you,
Well,
Naosherwan.
Thank you very much.